take instruction from staff and stewards, the assembly pointers at Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It is also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission, for example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you.
I'll ask each member to introduce themselves, starting with Mike.
Hello, I'm Mike Chaplin. I'm a councillor for Southey Ward and co-chair of this committee.
Hello, Councillor Janet Riddler, Stocksbridge and Upper Don.
Councillor Mark Whittaker, also Stocksbridge and Upper Don. Thank you.
Councillor Tony Downey, Mosborough Ward.
Nikki.
Councillor Nikki Belfield, Firth Park Ward. Thank you.
Councillor Gary Weatherall for Shire Green Brightside Ward.
It's Councillor Brian Holmshaw for Broomhill and Shirevale Ward.
Henry Nottage for Hillsborough Ward.
Councillor Andrew Sanger, Forward Ward.
And Councillor Jolson, Dawn Totley.
Councillor Dennis Chapman, Mosborough Ward.
And I'm Councillor Alan Woodcock, East Ecclesfield Ward, and chair of today's committee. Any apologies, Abby?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies for absence from Councillor Marianne Elliott, and her substitute will be Councillor Brian Holmshaw, and apologies for absence from Councillor Cliff Woodcraft, and his substitute will be Councillor Joe Watton. Thank you.
We don't have an exclusion of public address. No. So, declarations of interest. Minutes of previous meeting. Page 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Site visits will be entered into members' diaries. Item 7, update on proposed appraisal and management plans, including boundary changes to conservation areas in Sheffield. Page 17 of the agenda.
Hello everyone, I'm Neil Bauer. I'm the Principal Conservation and Design Officer. I'm here to present the information report seeking to inform members on the Conservation Area Review project. So for context, Sheffield has 35 conservation areas that it's responsible in terms of its function as a local planning authority and assessing proposals for development in those areas. The majority of these have some form of appraisal and some have management plans. There's a requirement within legislation to review boundaries from time to time. So in that context, we sought funding from MHCLG and Historic England to boost the capacity of the team to enable review of 6 conservation areas and their boundaries. The output from this is to include creation of detailed conservation area appraisals and management plans. The breakdown of funding was £100,000 was secured from the government and £65,000 was later secured from Historic England in relation to the management plans. It's important to say Historic England have been closely involved in the process as a joint client through the funding that we secured with them. The 6 conservation areas that were identified on the basis of the criteria for the project set out in the report were City Centre, Kelham Island, Aincliffe, Ranmore, Oaks Park and Norton. This information report relates to a first phase, which is the city centre in Kelham Island, where appraisals and management plans are being drafted for consultation. This was following a procurement exercise which received 5 bids. Consultants Donald Insall Associates were appointed to carry out the work, which included stakeholder engagement in the form of early listening sessions, including the early listening sessions and upcoming wider public consultation. So to date, the consultants have undertaken assessment of both areas to develop character appraisals, which includes identifying such issues as positive buildings, different architectural styles, materiality, and key views and spaces. They've also been looking at negative aspects of such areas which can be identified in relation to proposals for enhancement, which would be included within the management plan. The methodology to assess existing areas and areas for inclusion, potential boundary changes were, number 1, is there sufficient architectural or historic interest for the area to be considered special? 2, is this special interest experienced through its character or appearance, and does this relate to the existing conservation area, or is it a distinct character? 3, is it desirable for this character or appearance to be preserved or enhanced, and what problems does designation help solve? As mentioned, this was informed by early listening sessions with stakeholder groups as set out in the report. These groups were asked a number of questions around designations, boundaries and key aspects of character in order to prompt discussion and ideas for testing as part of the process. The appraisals themselves will be available as a storybook, which is essentially a very visual way of exploring and explaining how conservation areas have developed. And storybooks can layer information in a more dynamic way than traditional documents such as hard copies or static electronic documents. It also allows greater interrogation for the people that are using them to enable them to understand what that special interest is. The storybooks do meet the Council's guidance regarding online content, and static copies will also be available for viewing online. The appraisals will be comprehensive documents for comment, as they're essentially a matter of fact and professional assessment of significance in terms of heritage value. So essentially the appraisal documents which will be consulted on will be much fuller in terms of the content for people to comment on. The management plans which will be produced following public consultation are currently set out at a more high-level topic basis, reflecting that the optimal approach to management plans is through collaboration, understanding and essentially buy-in to an agreed plan for management of those areas. The consultation process will focus on what people think are important in terms of these issues and how these should be addressed through the management plan. The topics included in the consultation will be challenges for conservation areas, quality of design, connectivity, and reinforcing the special character. So essentially, as I say, those are a fairly high level, which will have some principles behind them for people to comment on, but the management plans will be detailed out much more at a later date, reflecting that input. In terms of the assessment of whether areas retain or have character and appearance it's desirable to preserve and enhance, essentially including more areas within the conservation area, the following amendments to boundaries are proposed. It's proposed to add parts of Castlegate, Fitzaland Square, Norfolk Street, West Street to the city centre conservation area. Similarly, an area to the north of Neepsend, including Cannon Brewery, Moorfield Flats on War Street, is proposed to be added to Kelham Island. Given that more of Neepsend is proposed to be included within the conservation area boundary, the consultants have also recommended renaming the conservation area to Kelham Island and Neepsend Industrial Conservation Area to reflect this geographic change. One small area is proposed to be removed from the city centre conservation area towards the bottom of Norfolk Street, which is essentially a rationalisation of the boundary where development has taken place, which straddled the boundary since designation. Other areas have been put forward, mainly through the listening sessions, have either been discounted or not proposed to be included as a boundary extension due to the differing character of those areas, and will be considered in their own right as part of a future process. So in terms of the upcoming public engagement, the appraisals, management plans and boundary proposals will be subject to a 6-week public consultation from the 9th of June to the 18th of July. This will include display boards in the Winter Gardens and Kelham Island Museum, which will be staffed by planning officers during certain periods. A drop-in event with bookable slots will be held on the 18th of June, recognising that stakeholders engaged as part of the listening events may want to continue some more formalised engagement, albeit these will be open to all if people want to drop in and will be publicised as such. Documentation will be available online for comment via an electronic form. A paper copy of each document will also be available to view at Howden House. Following public consultation, comments will be considered and the documents revised as appropriate. A further public meeting will be held in respect of the revised management plans before returning to Planning Committee in relation to the boundary change decisions. That's all.
Members' questions? Gary?
Thanks for the report. It's just when you went out to public consultation and you're getting all public's feedback from that, if something comes up in planning, you know, somebody submits something in one of those areas and it's controversial, has the City Council got override on this area?
Not quite sure what the question is, Gary. Just
Haven't
could
done
you
it.
try again?
No, well, if something comes along and politicians think it's the best thing in sliced bread, yeah, would it be able to come to full council to get it and you know to get that permission passed, even if it's in this area?
So you mean a planning application?
Yes.
So you mean a planning application in a current conservation area or potentially the extended conservation area?
Both. Yeah.
Either.
Yeah.
And you're, well, I mean, it would be subject to the usual decision-making process. It would come to committee if it met the it met the criteria for the terms of reference for bringing it to committee. If it was controversial, for example. And members would be expected to determine it in the usual way, and that's in accordance with the development plan unless other material considerations indicate otherwise.
It's your last little bit what captured it for me. And I'm glad you said that, because it's just that with all this public consultation going out into it now and everything's coming in, you know, maybe further down the line, you know, somebody can come along with something and then put a proposal into full council and get it overturned. So that would be rare, wouldn't it? We'll leave it at that, but thanks, Chair.
Nikki?
Thank you, Chair. You say that there are not many bits that are sort of being redrawn and leaving stuff out that was previously in, but are we having any direct communications with those people, organisations, where that does affect them? And I suppose, given what people have often said, coming to planning committee about awareness of proposals, just more widely, I know it says that the communications department will be sending stuff out, but does anything go directly to people who are in that area? Thank you.
A number of the organisations who are, I suppose, affected by the proposals to increase the conservation area boundaries were included in the early listening sessions. So a number of the businesses were notified through that process. The reduction in conservation area is a very small area, essentially, which, as I say, straddled a building. In terms of those people who may not be aware through any of those processes, they don't get, personally notified in terms of that, and it would be throughout the process, and then through the designation process they would be notified that the conservation area boundary has changed. But as we say, there's a fairly kind of comprehensive engagement process that we've undertaken through the early listening sessions and everything else that is happening in terms of the wider public consultation that will hopefully wrap up most of those businesses.
Joe?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for this. So, just my query, the big picture here, we're proposing, or consulting on adding pieces to existing conservation areas, and I suppose my question is whether is this because the areas we're adding have become more special, more interesting, more architecturally, historically interesting, or has our opinion about them changed, or are we just kind of, with the resource we've got to think about it, thinking about these areas now, and there's a process that will just expand and expand over time?
I think essentially there's a bit of both, in that obviously the conservation areas were designated a while ago, and I think our view of heritage and what is important can and does change. So we're looking at things through a slightly different lens now as well, in terms of what we think has that character and appearance, and lots of things have happened in terms of the management and development of those areas during that time. But it may also be that, as I say, we think actually bits might have been missed out in terms of the earlier designation, and that it's only right to consider them and include them now. Yeah, I think it's probably a mix of both.
Henry?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Neil. Thanks for all of the work that's gone into this. In general, I agree with the recommendations the consultants have come up with a couple of very small exceptions. Redrawing the boundary to exclude the new development around St Paul's Plaza. I get that that's new, so it's not part of the older character of the area. But because it's such a small amount, surely unsympathetic development, further extension upwards, or unsightly cladding or anything of those two buildings would affect the setting and therefore the character of the rest of the area around the Peace Gardens. And the same sort of logic troubles me with the exclusion of Royal Plaza. I think, is it Royal Plaza where the extension to West Street's going in? There's one little pocket that's been, it seems like it's been almost artificially excluded because it's entirely surrounded by conservation area. It feels like it should be part of the conservation area to protect the conservation area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of considering development proposals, the setting of a conservation area is something which can be considered anyway. I think the thing through the process we have to guard against is including areas or bits which don't meet the relevant standard in terms of character and appearance, and therefore devaluing what a conservation area is. I think sometimes when boundaries do nip in and out, there is a question of, well, would it be better to carry it straight on? And I think those are some of the proposals which can be tested as part of the public consultation as to whether people feel strongly that actually a boundary should continue straight on and include this, because there are things which contribute to the character and appearance of an area, and they don't have to be old, they don't have to be non-designated heritage assets, they can be new, good quality development which contribute to that. So if people feel strongly that something which has been excluded, you say artificially excluded, should it be included, then that can come forward as part of that process.
But with specific reference to the St Paul's one, that was within the conservation area, wasn't it? And now it's being redrawn, so it's out. given that it was in the conservation area and we're now saying that that development is out of character with the conservation area, doesn't that mean that the sort of conservation areas stumbled a little bit to let it get developed in the first place?
I don't think I'm quite sure which area you reference in terms of taking other bits of the conservation area out. But essentially that's part of the process, and it's assessing and testing the boundaries of conservation areas to see what has worked, what hasn't. Does it still retain that character and appearance, or should we redraw it? That's essentially what this process is seeking to do. And it may be that people feel that development proposals in the past, don't do what is required in terms of the character and appearance, and the boundaries should be reconsidered or rationalised in some way. But that's all part of this process to ascertain what people think about those boundaries.
Brian?
Thank you, Chair. I've got several questions. If we can take them separately, please, because they are quite different from one another, most of them. So, initially, I'm really pleased to have new areas added to the conservation area. So, thank you for your work on this, Neil. And also for the early consultations, so they proved quite useful, and I was fortunately able to take part in one of those. But I need to ask, what's our purpose here today? Where are we in the process, the planning meeting today? Why are we meeting to talk about this? That's one of my questions.
Chair, I think this is a key part of the process in terms of we've touched on sort of early listening sessions that the team carried out with key stakeholders. I think ultimately here, the decision for boundary changes to conservation areas is one for planning committee. So post-public consultation, there will be a decision that comes back to planning committee about whether the proposed boundary changes to the conservation areas, be they reductions or expansions, are acceptable. So you are the decision makers in that context. And before we went out for public consultation and everything that comes along with that, the point of today really is to raise public awareness, because obviously this is a public meeting about what's coming, so it's a good tool to do that, but also to raise awareness at planning committee and give you the opportunity to ask questions like that to understand the sort of the process and some of the broader sort of decisions that we have taken to this point. I'm not sure decisions is the right word, but some of the choices that have been made by the consultants up to this point that will inform the public consultation, so you're aware of them as planning committee as the ultimate decision makers.
Thank you very much. If I can ask another question. So, one of the places that was mentioned was Cannon Brewery, added to the area around Neepsend, and which will include Neepsend and Kelham Island. So what can be preserved of this building? What is the purpose of adding Cannon Brewery to the listing?
So essentially, Cannon Brewery, the site has been assessed as having a character and an appearance. It's desirable to preserve or enhance, as in the legislation. So, I suppose, taking things individually, there's a proposal there to add it to the conservation area. So, if it's included, it will form part of the conservation area. When development proposals come forward for that site, then it will be assessed against relevant policy in terms of design and those in relation to assessing proposals in accordance with that special character. Obviously, it also brings into within control demolition. But in terms of the site itself, there are a number of different aspects, as per the assessment of the consultants, which do contribute to the wider character of the area, and it would be beneficial to retain as part of any future scheme, or to consider as part of a development proposal.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Neil. And another question, if I can ask, is, but between Harmony Works and the building just down from it on Commercial Street, there was a painted building, there was a painted facade. which, to my knowledge, when I asked, wasn't able to be removed, the painting. Will this conservation area, if it's extended to that point, be able to stop that kind of action?
It couldn't do anything about that specific building in terms of what has happened. Conservation area status in itself wouldn't protect against buildings being painted, the facades being painted, but it is possible through, I suppose, the toolkit in terms of management of areas, through the management plan, as we've done in other areas in terms of Article 4 directions, which remove permitted development rights for that sort of thing. So Article 4 directions are usually in relation to the risk of something happening. So if there's a kind of a proliferation of certain things happening within a conservation area that is harmful to the character and appearance, then it's possible to introduce, I suppose, the removal of permitted development rights which allow that to happen. So in essence, the designation of the conservation area itself wouldn't stop that. It would need further steps.
And I'm going to follow up on that one, if you don't mind, please, Chair, to say, so how would that happen then? How could you then link an Article 4 to these conservation areas or to a development?
It would essentially be through the management proposals in terms of how to best manage conservation areas. So there are, within any area, any geographic area of Sheffield and the conservation areas, all conservation areas, I suppose, have different opportunities, different risks for them, and identifying the risks as part of this phase 1 and these 2 conservation areas. What are the risks in terms of what may affect that special interest, and if painting of facades is one of those risks that can come forward through the management plan, then that's something to be considered as part of that process.
Chair, I just add to that as well. Neil's entirely right. I think the context of the word risk is important there. So if we've got one unfortunate incident around the painting of a facade, that doesn't put us in a world where we've got a risk that would warrant an Article 4. So you'd need to be able to demonstrate a persistent or substantive risk to a conservation area or a broader area in that context to be able to introduce an Article 4.
Could I just follow up on that in terms of risk? Well, you have several hundred listed buildings within one conservation area, for example, as you may well have in city centre, and extending down towards Castlegate, if that's what happens, then surely there is the risk with all these buildings. It just seems a risk that's worth removing by having an Article 4 on it.
Chair, again, risk is relevant, and if only one of those buildings, and I'm not justifying the painting of the building, but only if one of those 1,000 buildings or hundreds of buildings has been painted, then the risk is low of others being painted. So again, it's about making proportionate decisions. It's not to say the point's not right, but in terms of the context of the risk that we're observing at the moment, it's not something that is there's not a proliferation of listed buildings being painted in the city centre that would warrant the action that we're talking about, but probably jumping a couple of steps ahead of where we are at the moment, I'd suggest.
Chair, can I also just add to that? It's only the non-listed buildings that could be painted. If it's listed, it can't be. It would need listed building consent.
But we are talking about something within a conservation area, and that also includes the non-listed buildings. Thank you. Just confirming that.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I believe we had a paper come to us some time ago which showed the areas that we're talking about, and that was put up on the screen, but I think it would have helped certainly some members to have had a link put into this paper so that we would know where to go to look at which geographical areas these conservation areas are. Probably haven't phrased that very well. Yeah, so I suppose that's more a statement than a question, but if a link could be provided, that would be helpful, and then we would be able to understand, I think, particularly the questions earlier about St Paul's, trying to get a fix on on what was being discussed there. Thank you.
I've read a report from the consultants that was very easy to understand and went into quite a lot of detail that contained things like the St Paul's changes. I'd assumed I received it as a member of the planning committee, but apologies, it has occurred to me I might have received it as a member of the conservation advisory group. If that's in the public domain, would it be possible to get that sent to planning members?
It's not in the public domain at the moment, Chair, but we can certainly share it around planning committee members. That's fine.
In that case, can I apologise for sharing information that was not in the public domain?
The level of sensitivity, Chair, is not to be. We're not concerned about that. That's fine.
Members' comments. Mike?
Regardless of what I said earlier, I do welcome this report, and I welcome the planning officers working towards expanding the conservation areas. It is something that's deeply felt by quite a lot of people in Sheffield. As we get older, we see so much change, and it's good to know that some areas are being protected because of their historical interest and for their architectural value. I'm more than happy for this to go forward.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with Mike on this. I suppose I would hope, and I know there are challenges to this, that as many people as possible get involved in the consultation. I think given you only have to look online, people are quite happy to comment about the city centre frequently. But it is, yeah, we have done something different with our city centre. It doesn't look the same as so many others, and particularly the heart of the city development, you know, that sense of retaining that heritage and making features of it, I think makes Sheffield city centre a really special place. So I welcome it being extended, but I do hope we find ways to try and encourage as many people as possible to get involved and have their say. And I assume, I suppose this is a question really, that when we get the final report after the consultation, it will have a lot more detail in terms of, you know, why the consultants recommended extending certain areas, and obviously the detail of what people have said.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. I'm certainly hoping that this is going to go through the system. Looking forward to funding for public support for this. Just wanted to clarify, so I suppose I have to come back to another question, which what's the process from now on? You know, where is this going to go to get through to a final point?
Thank you, Chair. So the next stage is a 6-week public consultation. I think we've touched on some events that we're holding in the city centre and Kelling. There's also some drop-in events as well. From that 6-week consultation, obviously officers will take some time to reflect and produce a detailed report for planning committee in terms of the outputs from that consultation. The ultimate destination is back to planning committee after the summer for planning committee to make a decision on the boundary changes and whether actually they are changes that the planning committee will support. Subsequent to that decision, if they are changes that we'll support, then we'll move through formal processes to make those changes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. You keep saying that you want to engage the public in all of this, but my worry is that a lot of the public have switched off. They don't come into the town centre because of all the problems there's been on Fargate. And the Connect bus, although it's getting running, it's spent a long time getting to that stage where people used it. So you're expecting a lot of people to do this online. and to come into town, but I don't know how much involvement you're going to get from the general public. It would be nice to think you've got a lot, but perhaps not that much. Sorry.
Janet?
Thank you. Yeah, I think just on the subject of engagement as well, I mean, obviously this is something that I've been following for quite some time, and I would join with the congratulations to planning for navigating us through to this stage of looking at the conservation areas. There has been a lot of interest in this. I think that we can be confident that that many members of the public have been engaging and will continue to engage with this. I know that stakeholders who we have all worked in partnership with, you know, Joined Up Heritage this week will be, it will be on their agenda. Other heritage organisations have been cascading all this information out. And whilst I acknowledge that, you know, digital engagement is probably one of the major ways forward, I think that we will get and are getting a lot of interest. And I think that where we are now with this process is a reflection of the increased amount of partnership working between planning and heritage stakeholders, for which I think that they should be congratulated. I think we've made huge advances over the last 2 or 3 years in that respect, and as Neil mentioned earlier, you know, heritage has become far better and more centrally placed in decision making thanks to the implementation of the heritage strategy. So I think that, you know, it's great that this has come to us today. I look forward to the consultation. I think we will get a lot of interesting feedback, and again, well done, and thank you to planning for all the work they put into this. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just ask members to note this, please? Yep. Thank you very much. Item 8, record of planning appeals, submissions and decisions.
Thank you, Chair. Unless anybody's got any questions, I was only going to just highlight the item on page 29, bottom of page 29, which was to report, members may recall dealing with an outline application for 22 houses at Manchester Road in Stocksbridge. That was back in August last year, and that was deferred to enable additional information to be provided. The applicant subsequently appealed against non-determination of the application, and that appeal was allowed and full costs were awarded to the applicant. There's a little bit of information there on the reasoning of the inspector. I mean, they noted that the key issue was the effect of the proposal on highway safety, but they considered that the change in speed limit occurred a significant distance away from the site access point, that the visibility displays that were proposed were acceptable, and that the evidence indicated that the site access would not pose a risk to highway safety. The application, so the inspector, in relation to the award for costs, noted that the application was presented to committee with a recommendation for approval based on an assessment by the planning officer and the highway officer. And they considered that there was no substantiated reason or evidence to suggest that speeding occurred along Manchester Road to such an extent that the development would have implications for highway safety. And they therefore felt that the surveys requested weren't necessary, and a decision should have been made without delay. We're yet to conclude on costs, but the conclusion of the appeal was that the council demonstrated unreasonable behaviour in their deferral of the application based on that request for further information. Thank you, Chair.
Can we members note that, please? Thank you. And the date of the next committee meeting is Tuesday the 24th of June at 2 p.m. here. Thank you very much.